Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Jean-Jacques Dessalines' proclamation, Liberty or Death. Now, Dessalines was the second leader of Haiti. He was a key figure in the Haitian Revolution. He's a tough cat to really get to grips with because, on the one hand, Dessalines is a revolutionary freedom fighter. He is helping to lead a slave uprising, revolting against fairly brutal conditions under the French slave system on Saint-Domingue, which becomes Haiti. On the other hand, he is a very violent, autocratic ruler, and his proclamation, Liberty or Death, reflect both of these components of his personality, both the liberatory, uplifting ethos of the anti-colonial aspect of the Haitian Revolution, but also the violent extremism of what was a mostly genocidal policy under Dessalines. Dessalines also, for better or worse, kind of sets the pattern for much of Haitian history. And so he's an important guy to come to grips with when trying to understand the history of Haiti and world experience. So I'm reading this out of Norton Anthology of World Literature. For those of you who don't know much about the Haitian Revolution or the history of Haiti, which I actually think, unfortunately, is probably most people, I want to give you just the opening portion of the Norton Anthology's introduction to this proclamation because it gives a concise and understandable historical context. The French colony of Saint-Domingue, the western portion of the Caribbean island of Hispaniola, was the jewel of the French Empire in the 18th century. A fertile source of sugar, coffee, tobacco, and cotton, its 500,000 slaves produced extraordinary wealth for France. The slaves also chafed against their oppression, erupting frequently in rebellion. As the French Revolution abolished old hierarchies, the people of Saint-Domingue hotly debated new questions about natural rights, especially freedom and equality. The colony's free blacks, white plantation owners, and the poorer white population began to fight among themselves over property and privileges under the new French Declaration of the Rights of Man. I've done a video about the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen before, and its sort of aspirational qualities. I've also done a video on Olympia de Gouges and the rights of woman, who points out one of the ways in which the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen fails in its liberatory ethos. The Haitian Revolution points to another one. In this unstable context in 1791, the slaves who made up the vast majority of the island rose up under the leadership of the brilliant strategist Toussaint Louverture and launched a war that would last more than a decade. During this period, Britain and Spain struggled to take control of Saint-Domingue, and fearful of losing its richest colony, France officially liberated the slaves in the hope of retaining power there. The plan worked for a period. Toussaint Louverture joined the French Republic and defeated the British and the Spanish. By 1801, he'd succeeded in abolishing slavery on the island and had declared himself governor for life. Napoleon, however, nervous about this independent black leader, captured Toussaint and in 1802 forced him into exile in Europe, where he died less than a year later. Toussaint's astute but ruthless second-in-command, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, 1758 to 1806, then took charge of the revolution. He successfully defeated the increasingly brutal French troops in 1803. Dessalines proclaimed a new nation, which he called Haiti, and had himself crowned emperor. His proclamation, Liberty or Death, was published in June 1804, shortly after he had ordered the massacre of thousands of white Haitians and declared Haiti an all-black nation. So, again, we get this very clear sense of these two competing tensions. The liberatory element of freeing the enslaved blacks of Haiti and joining forces actually with free blacks on Haiti to ironically fulfill some of the promises of the French Revolution, liberté, égalité, fraternité, these ideas of freedom and equality that are rooted in the classical liberal project. But at the same time, he is an authoritarian leader. And as we start talking about the actual proclamation itself, we'll see some of the rhetoric that we later see with other authoritarian leaders, people like Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, Mussolini, etc., etc., like dehumanization of enemies, demand for absolute obedience, insistence that the revolutionary project must be a violent one, etc., etc. So we see these kinds of tensions here, and I think it shapes a lot of the early history of Haiti, but it also shapes the ongoing history of the nation. And of course, it has not helped Haiti's stability, being one of the poorest, if not the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere. So, liberty or death, the actual proclamation itself. What he starts out with is this very overt liberatory rhetoric. And again, this is the revolutionary rhetoric. We are liberating ourselves from the forces of oppression. But it's also violent. Like there's the freedom element, but there's also the violence element. So he starts out, crimes, the most atrocious, such as were until then unheard of, and would cause nature to shudder, have been perpetrated. It's a great opening. Gonna get people's attention. The measure was overheaped. At length the hour of vengeance has arrived, and the implacable enemies of the rights of man have suffered the punishment due to their crimes. So that idea, the implacable enemies of the rights of man, the fact that this is associated with the French, white French people, and an ironic reversal of the aspirations of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. My arm raised over their heads has too long delayed to strike. At that signal which the justice of God has urged, your hands righteously armed have brought the axe upon the ancient tree of slavery and prejudices. Getting into that liberatory rhetoric. We have freed ourselves through armed struggle. It is justified by God. We have liberated ourselves, etc., etc. And that's great. Liberatory rhetoric, totally fine. But we also have these problematic elements, particularly of the dehumanization of the people identified as the enemies of the Haitian Revolution, which is white French people, but also white British and Spanish people who try to recolonize Haiti, Saint-Domingue, and then Haiti. So in this third paragraph, what then? Bent for many ages under an iron yoke, the sport of the passions of men, of their injustice, and of the caprices of fortune, mutilated victims of the cupidity of white French men. After having fattened with our toil these insatiate bloodsuckers, with a patience and resignation unexampled, we should again have seen that sacrilegious horde make an attempt upon our destruction without any distinction of sex or age. We, men without energy, of no virtue, of no delicate sensibility, should we not have plunged in their breasts the dagger of desperation? Where is that vile Haitian, so unworthy of his regeneration, who thinks he has not accomplished the degrees of the eternal by exterminating these bloodthirsty tigers? If there is one, let him fly. Indignant nature discards him our bosom. Let him hide his shame far from hence. The air we breathe is not suited to his gross organs. It is the pure air of liberty, august and triumphant. And then the beginning of the fourth paragraph. Yes, we have rendered to these true cannibals war for war, crime for crime, outrage for outrage. We have this dehumanizing rhetoric. He calls the French insatiate bloodsuckers. a sacrilegious horde who are presented as making an attempt upon our destruction without any distinction of age or sex. Bloodthirsty tigers. And then the true cannibals. So we've got, again, these series of dehumanizing elements which become very, very characteristic of totalitarian and authoritarian leaders in the 20th and 21st centuries. You think about Nazi propaganda, for example, the dehumanization of Jews. This is very, very standard. It's also worth noting, the contrast to this is that if you look at American pro-slavery propaganda, we also consistently see the dehumanization of African Americans, of blacks in general, of slaves in particular. Comparisons to animals, depictions of African people, African Americans, as being closer to monkeys. We see the same kind of thing to an extent with the Irish, etc., etc. So this dehumanization of others is a major component of establishing social and racial hierarchies, but also of stripping the other of the rights that belong to human beings. When the other is conceived of as an insatiate bloodsucker, a bloodthirsty tiger, a sacrilegious horde, a true cannibal, it's much easier to kill them than it is when the enemy is conceived of as a human being. But the other element of this paragraph that I find really, really important in terms of understanding Dessalines' totalitarian rhetoric is this last bit here. Where is that vile Haitian so unworthy of his regeneration, who thinks he has not accomplished the decrees of the eternal by exterminating these bloodthirsty tigers? If there is one, let him fly. In a way, this is the no true Scotsman fallacy, but basically what Dessalines says is, in order to be a true Haitian, you must endorse the genocidal violence against white, French, Spanish, and British colonists. You must endorse this violence. You cannot be a true Haitian. You are a traitor to the revolution if you do not endorse these actions. That's a very charged statement, but it's also the kind of statement that we see in totalitarian systems. Stalin is probably a great example of this. Anyone who is not overtly working for the revolution is an enemy of the revolution who must be destroyed. So we get these things. The other big context, I think, here that's worth bearing in mind, and much of the rest of the proclamation goes through these sort of similar rhetorical elements. This balance of liberatory rhetoric, appeals to freedom, justice, equality, etc., while also these demands for violence and genocidal violence specifically. The other thing that I think is really worth noting here is actually the work of another Caribbean Francophone author who lived a couple of centuries later, a century and a half later, Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon is one of the most important post-colonial theorists. In his book, The Wretched of the Earth, one of the arguments that he makes is that this is precisely the kind of attitude that is necessitated by colonialism. Basically, what he argues is that through the act of colonialism, the settler, which is Fanon's term for colonist, creates the categories of settler and native, which is Fanon's term for colonized peoples. So the very categories themselves are constituted by the act of colonialism, and in that constitution, in the creation of those categories of settler and native, they are inherently and inextricably in conflict with one another. And Fanon more or less directly argues that the only recourse the native has to a system that inherently faces them, Fanon typically uses the male gender, writing in the 1950s, but Fanon argues that the only recourse that natives have to the inherently violent system facing them is to use equal violence in response. There are other post-colonial theorists who are more on the fence about the use of violence, more opposed to the use of violence in some instances, but clearly Jean-Jacques Dessalines he prefigures this idea that Fanon develops in The Wretched of the Earth, that the only way for colonial liberation to happen because of the very nature of colonialism itself is through equal violence being directed by the native at the settler. And Dessalines was successful, for better or worse, in terms of Haitian history.